A cracked sheet of goatskin parchment sits in a locked cabinet in the manuscript vault of the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in Aksum, Ethiopia. It has not left that building in centuries. On it, in old GES script, is a chapter from the Book of Jubilees, and that chapter describes a country, a real one, with borders, with rivers, with a mountain at its center. A land Noah's family surveyed after the flood, divided by oath, and then watched vanish beneath the water. The church councils removed Jubilees from the Bible in the 4th century, banned it, called it dangerous, and for 1,600 years, the land it describes stayed exactly where the text left it, underwater. Then, in 1947, Hebrew fragments of Jubilees surfaced in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, older than any gospel, proving the book was being copied and guarded 2 centuries before Christ. Not a medieval forgery, not a myth. The text gives coordinates. It names the rivers that bound the land. It records the exact mountain that sat at its center. And it says that land was the holiest ground on earth. In the next several minutes, you will see what the text describes: the submerged landmass modern archaeology found in the exact region it points to, and why the oldest manuscripts have been locked behind church walls and government restriction since 1974. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. This isn't one vague passage. It's a sustained geographic survey that runs across 2 full chapters. The description sits in Jubilees 8 and 9, in the section where Noah divides the post-flood world among his 3 sons. The oldest surviving witnesses to it are the Hebrew fragments recovered from Qumran Cave 4, cataloged in the 4Q216 through 4Q228 series, carbon dated to roughly the 2nd century BC, older than any New Testament text by 200 years. The complete version survives only in the Ethiopic tradition, the GE's manuscripts kept in Ethiopia, where Jubilees never left the Bible at all. R. H. Charles produced the standard English translation in 1902 from those Ethiopic copies. And Charles noticed something he could not explain. He wrote that the geography in chapter 8 was far too detailed, far too specific, to be the vague symbolic mapping of an apocalyptic writer. It read, he admitted, like it was copied from an actual map. And this is where it gets disturbing, because the level of detail is wrong for ancient religious literature. Apocalyptic texts deal in symbols: beasts, numbers, thrones, stars. They do not file survey reports. But Jubilees 8 does not describe a vision. It describes a procedure. The text says, Noah's sons took a written document, a book, from their father's chest, and read the divisions out of it by lot. Chapter 8, verse 11. They are not receiving a prophecy. They are reading a deed. And the boundaries in that deed are not spiritual. They are measured. The text tracks the border of Shem's central portion by named landmarks, the way a surveyor walks a property line. It moves from the Tina River to the mountain called Rapha, to the mouth of the water, to the Gihon, to the Garden of Eden at the southern edge. Compass directions, named rivers, a fixed mountain at the center. This is not the language of a man describing a dream. This is the language of a man describing a place he expects you to be able to find. And the framing device makes it worse, not better. The text does not say Noah saw the divisions in a dream. It says the boundaries were already written down in a book, before the sons ever drew their lots. The map existed first. The oath came after. Someone, according to Jubilees, had surveyed and recorded the whole post-flood world onto a document, and Noah's family simply read their inheritances off of it. A finished map of a land that, on the real terrain, was already sinking. What we're looking at breaks into 3 parts: the location, the center, and the disappearance. Start with the location. Chapter 8, verse 12, describes Shem's inheritance as the middle of the earth, and it fixes the boundary at the Tina River in the north, and runs it south and east until it reaches the Garden of Eden. For centuries, readers treated the Tina as a symbolic river, a poetic name. But the geographers who mapped the Jubilees boundaries onto real terrain found that the described landmass sits precisely over the basin of the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Gulf that they empty into. The exact corridor where the flood narratives of the ancient Near East are all set. The text places the holiest land on earth in the one lowland basin that we now know was above water in the ancient past and is underwater today. He had no way to know that. No ancient writer had a bathymetric map of a submerged basin. Yet the geography lands exactly on it. But the text doesn't stop at borders. What follows in chapter 8 is the center, and it's stranger still. Verse 19 states that within Shem's portion sit 3 places, and it names them: the Garden of Eden, Mount Sinai in the middle of the desert, and Mount Zion at the center of what the text calls the navel of the earth. The Ge'ez phrase is Tibura Ares, the navel of the earth, a single fixed point from which the whole world is measured outward. The mainstream reading treats this as theology, Israel imagining itself at the spiritual center of creation. But read it the way it's written, and it is not a feeling. It is a claim about a coordinate. The text says there was one exact spot, and it was the middle, and everything else was laid out in relation to it. He describes a datum point, a survey origin, the place you drive the first stake before you measure anything else. And the text is precise about the arrangement. Verse 19 says the 3 places, Eden, Sinai, and Zion, were created facing one another, not scattered, aligned, set in relation to each other, around the central point, the way survey markers are placed to hold a line. A dreamer describing a holy vision does not tell you the sacred sites face each other on a fixed axis. A man reading a map does. The writer treats these as physical locations with a physical relationship, positioned around the navel like stakes around an origin. He is not worshiping the center. He is locating it. And then comes the part that shouldn't be possible. Chapter 9 records what happened to that central land. Noah's sons divide their portions, and Noah binds them with an oath. Chapter 9, verse 14. Every son swears to hold only the land that came to him by lot, and to curse anyone who ever seizes a portion that was not his. And then verse 15 records the sentence attached to the oath. The text says, the curse holds until the day of judgment, when the Lord will punish with sword and with fire everyone who violated the division. Read that carefully. The land was not simply given out. It was sealed by oath, and the seal carries a penalty that runs to the end of the world. This is the same structure the removed books use again and again. A thing set apart, bound before witnesses, and closed until the final judgment. The central land of the earth was not just apportioned, it was locked. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English editions render the boundary word in chapter 8 as simply tongue, as in the tongue of the sea, a strip of land or water. Charles's 1902 edition uses it and moves on, treating it as a quaint idiom. But the underlying Ge'ez term carries a more specific sense. It denotes a narrow neck of water, a strait, the exact geographic feature where a wide basin necks down and empties into a larger sea. The text uses that word to mark the southern outlet of Shem's land. And when the described boundary is walked on a real map, that narrow neck of water falls precisely on the strait that drains the Gulf Basin into the open ocean. The translators smoothed it into poetry. The manuscript was giving a landform. The text moves on. But the implication sits there. The book names the one choke point where the flooded land drains away, and it names it as a border. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches what the science actually found. In December 2010, the archaeologist Jeffrey Rose published a paper in the journal Current Anthropology titled New Light on Human Prehistory in the Arabo-Persian Gulf Oasis. Rose laid out the evidence for a now submerged landmass beneath the Persian Gulf. Before the seas rose at the end of the last ice age, the Gulf basin was not water. It was a fertile lowland fed by the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Qumran, and a river system geologists call the Shat, watered further by freshwater springs still bubbling up through the seabed today. At its largest, that exposed land was roughly the size of Great Britain. And then, over a span ending around 8,000 years ago, the Indian Ocean rose and swallowed it. The fertile center of the ancient Near East went under. The text describes a central, sacred, well-watered land at the middle of the world, bounded by named rivers and drained through a narrow strait that was sealed and lost. The science found a central, fertile, well-watered land in that exact basin, fed by those exact rivers, drained through that exact strait, that was flooded and lost. The parallel is not metaphorical, it is structural. And Rose noted something else in the surrounding research. Around 7,500 years ago, sophisticated, fully formed settlements appeared suddenly on the shores of the Gulf, out of nowhere, with no clear local ancestors. The obvious reading is that they were refugees, people displaced from the drowned land, washing up on the new coastline all at once. A population that came from the center after the center went under. And the timing lines up with the drowning itself. The flooding was not a single wave. Sea level data show the basin filling gradually as the ice age ended, the coastline creeping inward over generations. The exposed land shrinking year by year until the last of it disappeared around 8,000 years ago. A slow, remembered catastrophe, exactly the kind of event a people would carry in their oldest stories, and exactly the kind of land loss a written deed would try to record before the border it described was gone. Rose also pointed out plainly that nearly every civilization in southern Mesopotamia preserved a flood story, consistent in structure from the oldest Sumerian tablets to Genesis. The memory of a lost land under the water is not unique to Jubilees. Jubilees just gives it borders. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in the 4th century, and it follows a pattern. Jubilees was pushed out of the Western canon and its detailed geography set aside. Jerome, compiling the Latin Bible around the year 400, dismissed the book's expanded histories as unreliable. Augustine, writing in the same era, treated its calendar and its geography as errors to be corrected against the shorter Genesis account. None of them addressed the specifics. None of them explained why a 2nd century BCE writer mapped the holiest land on earth onto a basin that would later be found submerged. The Ethiopian church, operating independently, kept Jubilees in its Bible and copied it faithfully for over 1,000 years, which is the only reason the full text survives at all. When the Scottish explorer James Bruce carried GS manuscripts of it back to Europe in 1773, scholars treated the geography chapters as garbled, a confused memory of the Genesis table of nations. They had no explanation for the precision. They offered dismissal instead. Now, here's where it gets active. Access to the oldest Ethiopic manuscripts tightened sharply after 1974, when the revolution in Ethiopia brought a new government that reclassified church holdings as protected national property. Researchers describe applications to examine the Axum collections directly being delayed or denied for years at a time, with scholars forced to work from photographs and older secondary copies rather than the originals. And the drowned basin itself has never been properly surveyed. To confirm what is down there, archaeologists say plainly, you would have to find a submerged site and excavate it underwater. And that work has barely begun. The one landmass that would settle the question sits under tens of meters of Gulf water, in a region ringed by closed borders and contested waters, effectively sealed. The land the text describes as locked until the judgment is, in physical fact, locked. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying the Book of Jubilees is a nautical chart or that a drowned paradise with a stone marker at its navel is waiting intact on the Gulf floor. Jubilees is not a survey report from a lost expedition. But what the text describes, when you read it carefully, matches what the science keeps finding. A central land at the middle of the ancient world, fed by the Tigris and the Euphrates. A fertile basin bounded by named rivers and drained through a narrow strait. A place that was sealed and then lost beneath the water. Populations appearing on the new shoreline all at once as if displaced. The writer of Jubilees had no bathymetry, no core samples, no map of a seabed no human had walked in thousands of years. He should not be able to place the holiest ground on earth on the one basin that fits. And yet the text sits there, in GEs and in Hebrew, in fragments pulled from a cave at Qumran, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the described land maps onto the Gulf Basin, if that basin was fertile, inhabited, and above water in the ancient past, if it was fed by the exact rivers the text names and drained through the exact strait the text marks, and if it was swallowed by the sea and left populations scattering onto the new coast, and if a book older than the Roman Empire describes all of that in plain geographic language, then the text is not mythology. It is a record. Whoever wrote Jubilees was not inventing a symbol. He was preserving a memory, and he wrote it down with the matter-of-fact tone you'd use recording a property line. The land he describes, bounded by the Tina and the Gihon, centered on the navel of the earth, sealed by oath until the judgment, is either a symbol we have misread for 2 millennia, or it is exactly what he says it is. A real country, in a real basin, now under real water. The manuscripts remain in Axum, behind church walls and government restriction. The Hebrew fragments sit under glass in Jerusalem. Rose's survey of the drowned basin is filed in a journal, and the land itself lies under the Gulf, unexcavated, exactly where the text left it. In a book the church removed from the Bible 16 centuries ago, Noah's sons stand around a written deed, divide a land by oath, and seal it until the end of the world. The border is still there. The seal is still intact, and the land is still under the water, exactly the way Jubilees said it would be. If you want to see what else was cut from the record, the next investigation is already on your screen.